So yes, Maine Won't Wait, Maine's 4-year plan for climate action. Before we get into it, as Suzanne said, my name is Kathleen Meil, and I am the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. And our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. And MCA does that through education and collaboration and advocacy, really bringing people together to achieve our shared goals. And MCV does that through lobbying, influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. And that last piece, the piece about getting involved in elections, does make us a little bit unusual among Maine environmental organizations. We actually have a political action committee, Maine Conservation Voters Action Fund, which makes endorsements and works to elect climate and environmental champions. And I love this photo. It's from an endorsement event that we did with Governor Mills last spring. And I wanted to share it because it's an example of how all of our work comes together. You know, when Janet Mills first became governor in 2019, the environmental community and probably all communities in Maine understood that there was this tremendous window of opportunity that was opening. There had been so many things that we knew we wanted to make progress on together as a state that we just had not been able to. And we recognized that after years of denying climate science and delaying climate action, Maine finally had this chance to step up as a climate leader. And boy, did we. Oh my goodness, that first year, 2019, it was just a whirlwind of winning. We didn't get tired of it, don't worry. In 2019, the legislature enacted really significant climate and clean energy initiatives. We pledged to reduce carbon pollution 45% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. We pledged to increase renewable energy to 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. If you tuned into the State of the State address last night, you heard that we're actually going to accelerate that goal and hit 100% renewable energy in Maine by 2040. Turning that up by 10 years. It is just really exciting. And the other thing that happened in 2019 that was really exciting was the creation of the Maine Climate Council. The Maine Climate Council brought together so many different people from across the state and across government to put together a 4-year plan for climate action. And that plan was developed and delivered to the legislature on December 1st of 2020. And that's what we're going to spend the bulk of our time together today talking through. What's in the plan, where Maine stands at this halfway point through the 4-year period. As Suzanne said, feel free to jump in with questions either. Let me see if I can find where the chat is. Here we go. Let me just open that window so it's right there. So yeah, I will see your messages if they're in the chat. If you want to unmute and jump in, go for it. But first, I do want to just share a little bit of context about how Maine Won't Wait came together.
Hey, Kathleen, before you go on, you
Yeah.
talked about the two organizations that you are part of, and just in terms of their, so both groups do advocacy. I'm just wondering how you get tax-free, charitable donations if you do advocacy and politics.
It's a really good question, Linda. And what we we describe the Maine Conservation family of organizations. So Maine Conservation Alliance is our 501c3 organization. And that's where we do the bulk of our education and little a advocacy, right? And then Maine Conservation Voters is our 501c4 organization. Those are not tax deductible donations, and that's under a 501c4, you can do unlimited lobbying, and that's where we do things like our accountability work. Many of you may be familiar with the environmental scorecard that we put out on an annual basis. And then Maine Conservation Voters Action Fund is actually a third distinct organization. That's our political action committee. So 3 different tax statuses, 1 overarching mission.
Thanks for clarifying. That's
Absolutely. Very helpful. Yeah, so while we're talking structure, let's talk about the structure of the Climate Council. The Climate Council includes about 50 people on the council itself, and those are the commissioners of all of the state agencies. They are representatives from business, from environmental advocacy organizations, from forestry and farming. That's the sort of highest level of the Climate Council. As with so many kinds of organizations, a lot of the work happens at the next level down from that top tier. And that is the working groups of the Maine Climate Council. So there are 6 different sector-specific working groups, and that's what you see here. And then there are also 2 subcommittees that go back and forth with all of the working groups. So that's the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which you can guess exactly what they do. They're pulling together the best available science and technical information about both the climate impacts that we're experiencing already in Maine and what we're projected and what we're seeing going into the future. And then the Equity Subcommittee is another group that goes back and forth with all of the working groups to think about how the impacts and the opportunities can be shared equitably across all Maine communities. When you add up those working groups and subcommittees and the council itself, you get about 250 scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan state and local officials, engaged citizens. Those are just the folks with official roles. Again, you zoom out even further, and there are thousands of people who have attended a Climate Council meeting, submitted an online feedback form about some piece of the climate action plan. The whole of government approach to climate action that the Biden administration has gotten so much energy around, really, I'm going to say it started in Maine. I'm not going to say we're the first people to ever think about pulling everyone together, but it was happening here in 2019. I am the co-chair of the Buildings, Infrastructure, and Housing Working Group, and my colleagues at MCV also serve on the Energy Working Group and the Natural and Working Lands Group. And we've got partners across all of the other working groups and the subcommittees as well. So got our fingers in things. A note about timing. The Climate Council started its work in late 2019. And at the beginning of that process, it looked exactly the way any other big stakeholder process had ever looked. There were big press conferences where everybody stood shoulder to shoulder and nobody thought twice about it. There were strategy sessions. There were public meetings where hundreds of people packed into the civic center and talked about the work we were going to do together. And then it became March 2020, and we had to throw out everything we thought we knew about doing this work. All of a sudden, our task had to do with getting Maine people to log on to 3-hour Zoom meetings for Climate Council meetings. We were suddenly coming up with partners to work on webinars and lunch and learns and programs just like this. We were suddenly not turning people out to town hall meetings, but turning them out to online feedback forms. And like so many of the things that we cobbled together during the pandemic, some of our workarounds turned out to work actually very well. So I can remember being so anxious about that first buildings, infrastructure, and housing working group meeting that we did on Zoom. I thought, who is going to come? Who is going to participate? How is this going to work? And then I noticed that I had an entire high school climate action class Zooming in, asking great questions in the chat, sharing what they were learning. Now, I was very happy having a couple of kids doing remote school myself. At that point, I thought, I'm glad I've helped this teacher fill that hour of the day. And boy, am I glad that all of these members of the working group are hearing directly from the next generation of climate advocates. That wouldn't have happened if they had had to get on a school bus and drive to Augusta to sit in the back of some conference room. Okay, Zoom's maybe not so bad. Also, we did a little bit of sharing. I know that Suzanne is at the reserve right now. Gabriel's in Portland. I'm in Camden. We're all enjoying this time together. Again, some workarounds actually turned out to work pretty well. And when it comes to the climate action plan, it worked really well. We were able to put together this 4-year plan for climate action with 4 big overarching goals, 8 main strategies, and dozens of specific recommendations. A lot of those recommendations actually line up very nicely with the historic federal legislation that we've seen in the last year or two, the American Rescue Plan Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the most significant climate bill ever passed, the Inflation Reduction Act. Together, all of these federal investments are really delivering the support for climate and resilience priorities that Maine needs to make sure that this plan doesn't just get stuck on a shelf, but actually gets implemented and brought to life. I think it's also worth noting that Maine Won't Wait has received a bunch of national recognition. This year, the American Planning Association named Maine Won't Wait the best sustainability plan in the country, saying that it really demonstrates the importance of planning in ensuring that programming and policy decisions are really moving the needle toward a more resilient future. So that's great. We did it. We put together a phenomenal plan. We got an award, but how's it going? We're halfway through the 4-year plan right now, and it's a good question to ask. Is it working? Well, this winter, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, that's the office that has led the development of the climate action plan and the Climate Council work. They launched a really, really cool interactive dashboard so that you can answer that question for yourselves. So when you go to this address here, maine.gov/climateplan/dashboard, you'll find an interactive map that lets you focus in on key metrics, like how many heat pumps have been installed in Maine, how many electric vehicle charging stations are there, how many clean energy jobs are there, how many land conservation projects, and more. I'm going to share some of that data with you today, but really go play around with the dashboard. It is really cool. They update it regularly. And so it's just a great thing to, bookmark it and go check it out every so often. So today we are going to go through each of the strategies in the plan, and I'll share some of the latest data. to see how we are doing. Again, feel free to jump in because it'll feel a little bit like each slide is a new topic. So feel free to jump in before we move on. Let's start with transportation.
Kathleen, can I jump in for 1 second? And
Yeah,
just
please do.
ask, and this is not meant to be a challenging question, but I'm curious, I mean, as we like make strides, will the goals and benchmarks also change? Because we keep learning about like, it's not enough, even when it's really big, it's not enough, and there's
Absolutely.
more potential.
Yeah, and we are halfway through this climate action plan, which means we're just about to start writing or developing the next 4-year climate action plan. So the goalposts won't change for this plan, but we will absolutely have to set higher goals. And in fact, last night we heard Governor Mills change the timeline for our transition to clean energy, right? And say, we actually are already at 48% renewable energy. We're not going to wait till 2050 to get to 100. We can do that by 2040 now. So there will be that that sort of acceleration. Now, some of the goals started out what felt ridiculously ambitious, right? And I'll use transportation as an example. We have a goal of having 219,000 EVs on the road by 2030. I have to look at the calendar to remind myself what year we're in now. And it turns out that 2030 is not that far away. Now, we have made phenomenal progress, but we still have less than 10,000 EVs on the road in Maine, right? We're at 8594 as of October. We've got a long way to go. It may be that some of those big changes, I saw something this morning that they're predicting that EVs will be comparably priced to conventional internal combustion engine cars within the year, that it will no longer be like, well, do you want to spend $10,000 more to get the EV version? They'll just be comparable with all the incentives and declining prices. So maybe we'll hit that 2030 goal, no problem. It feels ambitious right now, but things are changing. And then there will also, of course, be goals that we have to look at and say, yeah, we didn't aim high enough. One of the ways that we're addressing that, and trying to make it easier to hit those EV goals, is to think about charging infrastructure. Now, most of the data tells us at this point that most EV drivers end up charging at home or at work. There are lots of initiatives and programs in place to incentivize chargers at home and work for exactly that reason. But we also know that we're social creatures, right? And a strong, visible network of public charging infrastructure is a really important signal. It's also really important because Maine's a big state, and if you want to get to Trader Joe's from where I live, you're going to have to charge at some place along the way. But it's even more than that. It's the signal that this is the norm. So we have done tremendous work in accelerating the number of EV charging stations, and federal funding is a huge, huge help here. Some gets allocated to states through a formula. So, for example, we know that Maine will get $19 million from the federal bipartisan infrastructure law over the next 5 years, specifically for EV charging. But then there's also a whole nother bucket of money that gets allocated through competitive grants. So we will certainly apply for additional funds through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Program, and we'll get some amount of that. And then there's also funding allocated for EV infrastructure in the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, which is Maine's implementation of the American Jobs and Recovery Plan. lots of different funding streams. Don't even try to keep them all straight, but it's important to know that there's a lot happening. And I included this picture here. This is an EV school bus in my town. Maine actually led the country last year with the 4th highest number of EV bus awards per capita from the federal government. So lots of towns, including mine, got EV school buses for free. The thing I love about this picture is in our school system's business officer or business director actually got his bus driving license because he wanted to drive the EV school bus in the town's Christmas parade. He was so excited about it. And you can almost see a little Santa hat in there. It's exciting. It's exciting for the kids to be riding on an EV school bus. It's exciting for families to see it. It's both making the concrete difference and signaling to everyone in a community that things are changing. Yes, so I'm looking at Andrea's question about no idling policies. And for sure, Maine actually does have some good no idling policies on the books, I believe, but I've got to do a little bit more. And you're absolutely right that the transition to electric vehicles isn't the only piece of the puzzle when it comes to reducing emissions from the transportation sector. We're also working really hard to increase fuel economy standards for conventional vehicles. This is an example of something. I actually had the opportunity to do a press conference with Adam Lee from Lee Auto a couple of weeks ago, and he said there's never been anything, not seat belts, not fuel economy standards. There's never been anything that the auto industry did without the federal government saying you have to do this. And guess what? They've always been able to do it. So let's jack up the standards for that fuel efficiency. They can meet them. They know how. And then we all benefit. Public EV, oh my gosh, Lynn, you are tapping into a really, really important piece of this puzzle too, about public transportation. Maine has terrible options for public transportation. I had some out-of-town visitors this summer who said, gosh, there seem to be a lot of hitchhikers around here. We don't see hitchhikers where we live. I said, yeah, you probably have like city buses where you live. This is the way you get from one place to another if you don't have a car of your own. There is a lot of great work happening at the Department of Transportation right now. They're developing a family of plans about active transportation, about public transportation, and the governor talked a little bit about this in the State of the State last night. So it's definitely going to be something to watch. And I see lots of tips in the chat about ways to get involved in that process. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next strategy, which has to do with buildings. Again, another thing that probably everyone on this call has heard before, Maine is the most heating oil dependent state in the nation. 60% of our homes are heated by fuel oil. The national average is 4%. That means that we are incredibly vulnerable to increased fossil fuel prices and volatility. I don't have to tell any of you this because you are probably paying some of those higher prices this winter. Hopefully, you've also seen that we are making phenomenal progress towards our goal of installing 100,000 heat pumps by 2025. In fact, we're nearly there. We're already over 82,000. And the interesting thing about these charts here is you'll see that it's actually, the data is broken out by market and low income installations for both heat pumps and weatherization. That's because the Climate Council was really clear about the need to make sure that this transition, what's often called beneficial electrification, that benefits everyone in Maine, whether you can afford to do to bear the full cost of those upgrades or not. There should be incentives and programs designed for you. And you can see that we are well on our way. There was an article in the Washington Post last week, front page of the Washington Post, about how Maine's heat pumps stood up to that terrible cold snap that we had about 10 days ago. And it was so great. The governor talked about it last night, and just that enthusiasm. Maine really has been leading the nation in the transition to heat pumps, which is terrific, because it means we get to sort of hopscotch over all of those places that transition from oil to natural gas and are now needing to get off of natural gas. We're skipping over that. We're going straight to high efficiency cold weather heat pumps. And by the way, getting a little air conditioning in the summer when the temperatures are not what they used to be. I'm going to zip over to our carbon emissions next. This is our goal to reduce our carbon pollution 80% by 2030. Oh, wait, that's wrong. That's the renewable energy transition. Sorry. The emissions reduction is I am looking at the wrong thing. Okay. Thank you for sticking with me here. I've got two different sets of data that I'm trying to refer to at the same time. Let's talk about the role of clean energy in helping us reduce our emissions. I'm putting it together now. Thank you. We are doing a great job of transitioning to clean, made in Maine renewable energy. And we actually have the ability to do so much more, right? We've seen our solar installations pick up dramatically in the last few years. And we also have this incredible opportunity to dig in to offshore wind. The Gulf of Maine is home to some of the strongest and most consistent winds in the world. It is absolutely a focus of development for the offshore wind industry. Most of that is in federal waters, but there is an opportunity for us to connect those clean energy jobs and that renewable energy transition directly to Maine. So we've got incredibly innovative technology developed at the University of Maine. We've got an opportunity to build in high equity and labor and environmental standards from the very beginning. And all of that will help us both hit these emissions reduction and clean energy targets and grow our economy. There's just a tremendous opportunity to grow the workforce, to attract and retain young people, and for industries like offshore wind to really set those standards and build the industry right from the first time, or from the first. Just last year, the governor's energy office established what they call the Clean Energy Partnership Program. And that is really focused on advancing clean energy initiatives to support and grow the workforce and increase innovation in Maine's clean energy sector. Governor Mills set a goal to reach 30,000 clean energy jobs in Maine by 2030. That's more than double what we have today. But it is really, we are getting there, and we're doing it along with our partners in organized labor, who are bringing a lot of information and experience about the power of things like project labor agreements to ensure that everybody who works in Maine's clean energy sector has a good family sustaining job, high labor practices, just really making sure that we are able to solve a whole bunch of problems at the same time. In addition to new jobs in new sectors, the Climate Council also focused on opportunities to support and grow Maine's heritage industries, including fishing and farming and forestry and outdoor recreation. Outdoor recreation alone is a $3 billion industry in Maine. It supports more than 41,000 jobs, and there's a lot of power in that. The Land for Maine's Future program is one of our most successful tools for advancing protecting and supporting those heritage industries and conserving land. The way LMF works is it secures public access to mountains, to lakes, to rivers, to shorelines in all 16 counties across the state. Since it was established in 1987, LMF has conserved more than 335,000 acres of working forest, more than 9,800 acres of working farmland, more than 30 working waterfront sites. Those resources all have climate benefits for our ecosystems and for biodiversity. They also have economic benefits and the jobs that they sustain. While LMF has always been popular, it's had broad bipartisan support from the very beginning. It had always been funded through bonds, which meant that it was always a political battlefield. And by the time Governor Mills took office, the Land for Maine's Future program, the budget was completely depleted. The fund was empty. And the environmental community, the Land for Maine's Future Coalition, we're like, let's go after a big LMF bond. That's what we're working for. Imagine our surprise and delight when it actually got rolled into the state budget for the first time in 2021. That had never happened before. But as of 2021, we had significant $10 million a year for 4 years in the budget to really build out the Land for Maine's Future. And the really exciting thing about this program is every one of those dollars that Maine spends is matched by federal funds. So the Great American Outdoors Act, the America the Beautiful Act, they are opportunities for us to multiply our state investment and the impacts. This is so great because many of you may have heard of the 30 by 30 effort. It's a global initiative to conserve 30% of our lands and waters by 2030 in recognition that the biodiversity crisis is real, and conserving our lands and waters is an incredibly important strategy. Land for Maine's Future is one of the big ways that we approach that goal in Maine. Yes. Oh, and I see Linda's mentioning something about our food systems as well. And there were also really specific goals in the climate in Maine Won't Wait around increasing the production of Maine grown food and increasing access of Maine people to food grown here in Maine. I'm going to take a second to catch up with the chat before we go to the next slide, because I'm seeing Lynn is asking about the interplay of renewable energy installations and union jobs. You are absolutely right. This is a tricky thing. We are at a point right now where Maine does not have enough workers in a lot of industries, right? But when it comes to electricians, when it comes to clean energy tech jobs, we are really lacking. Now, this is an opportunity, right? We can flip that challenge on its head and say this is an opportunity. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to meet some young people who are at the University of Maine. I met both an undergraduate and a graduate student. The undergrad, born and raised in Maine, wanted to stay here to pursue engineering at Orono. The graduate student is from New Jersey. She said, listen, I want to work in offshore wind. This is the place to be. No one is doing work like the University of Maine, the Advanced Composites Center up there. It is mind-blowing, the work that they are doing. And it's attracting the best and brightest from around the country who say, I want to be doing this work at a high level. That means I need to be in Maine. There's a little bit of a runway for that though, right? She's here, she's getting her PhD, she's going to be amazing and do amazing things. She's not working right now. So how do we balance that need for workers today with the commitment that we have to being good partners to our labor allies, to making sure that we build industries that actually sustain Maine families, that we don't end up catering to companies that are going to ship workers in, do a bunch of work, and then ship them off to the next place. We want to invest in our communities. And there are a lot of moving parts in that. It's not easy. One of the things, I talked a little bit about our family of organizations, and I didn't even get into our family of coalitions, because we often joke at Maine Conservation Voters, Maine Conservation Alliance, that we're the coalition people. And new employees, they join our team. They're like, is there a list of all the coalitions we're a part of somewhere? It's like, oh, as soon as you finish it, you'll have another one to add to the bottom, because we know that we can't do this work without partnering, without linking arms with, land conservation and clean energy and union electricians and iron workers. There's so much richness in those relationships. And I really do, most of the time, feel incredibly optimistic about how we're going to navigate that, which is not to say that there aren't days that I just put my head down and say, how are we ever going to do it? It's so hard. But then you shake it off, go for a walk, come back, and then say, okay, how do we do this? We don't have the luxury of putting these problems off, which is actually really good, because we can put our heads together and get through some good problem solving. Andrea, yes, there is a direct dollar for dollar match. The Great American Outdoors Act and the America the Beautiful Act are both federal initiatives that require a state match. So as much as we put in, we will get from the federal government as well. So pretty exciting. And because, oh, interesting. Yes, I want to learn more about this Center for Labor and Community Education. Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to jot that down. And while we're talking about communities, let's talk a little bit about the Community Resilience Partnership Program. One of the things that the Climate Council heard again and again in all of the sector-specific working groups was, my town is working on this, but we just don't have the capacity. Or, gosh, I look at what Portland and South Portland are doing with they have sustainability offices with like many people who work in them. We have like a half-time town manager, and that's it in our town. There's a huge diversity in the amount of staffing and resources that Maine towns have, but there's a very high level of commitment and interest and willingness to dig in and do the work across Maine communities. It's just that some of our smaller communities need some of that technical assistance. That's great. That's a great problem for state government to tackle. And that's exactly what we're doing with the Community Resilience Partnership Program. Right now, there are 127 communities that are working actively through this partnership program. 76 of them are communities that have enrolled on their own. It's like, I'm the town of Rockland, I'm working with the Resilience Partnership Program. There are also another 51 communities who are working with what they call a service provider. So this is somebody, these are towns that perhaps don't even have the capacity to apply for the partnership program on their own, but they do work with the Island Institute or the Resilience Works Network and say, I know I want to do this, can you help? And those community service providers then get the funding and are able to work arm in arm with local communities. Those regional service providers can help recruit communities. They can help do some of the work. And it may be that a community that starts as a service, working with a service provider, then moves into the community action grant the next year. Those are available to municipalities and to tribal governments and to unorganized territories. And that's where you say, gosh, we've got this one spot that always floods. We've got this culvert that is collapsing. We've got drought, impacts of droughts. And we want to do a tick education because we've got just an absolute explosion in Lyme disease. All of those things that local communities know better than anybody else what they need. And this is where the state can say, all right, we stand at the ready. Some of the work that happens at the community level also happens through the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. There are so many different funds. There are so many different programs. There is at the end of, or at the beginning of December, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future put out a progress report. And there are like 3 pages at the back of the progress report, that spell out all the different places that funding is coming from the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, from the Inflation Reduction Act, from this state program or that regional program. I mention all of this because it is expensive what we're trying to do, right? This clean energy transition and community resilience, it takes investment. The investment it takes is far less than the cost of inaction, but it's still significant. And I'm just been so impressed with the way GOPIF, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, has been able to pull the threads and say, whether it's federal funding or private foundations, how can we maximize those resources for Maine communities? And that's really who it's about, right? The communities, the people of Maine. There was tremendous participation. If we go back for just a second to the fact that we were doing this work of developing the plan in 2020, absolutely shocking to me how many people said, yep, the whole world's falling apart around me, and I'm going to hop on Zoom to talk about climate planning. It matters to us. Last spring, we were able to come together in person in Augusta for this Communities Leading on Climate conference. And there were people all over the place saying like, yeah, we're doing this thing in our town and it's working really well. And business cards were flying back and forth and people jotting down phone numbers and saying, this is so great. Will you tell me how to do that in my town? It is really exciting. I also want to highlight 2 initiatives that passed through the legislature and were funded last year, one around climate education and one around the Climate Corps. Now, when it comes to climate education, this was a direct request of Maine teachers and students who said, there's so much out there. We need help sorting through the resources, getting the professional development around what's the best way to talk to our students about climate. What's the best way to get them the information they need to be engaged citizens, but also to be productive parts of the solution. And that's in place. There's a pilot program and it is happening now. Many of those young people, I hope, will end up joining the Maine Climate Corps. And Linda, absolutely great question. Last year, a pilot program was established that put, I want to say, 2 directors in place in one community. And this year, we're going back to the legislature to try to build out that program. It will end up looking sort of like AmeriCorps, but because it will be operated on a state basis, we have the opportunity to do things like set minimum salaries, make sure that the folks who are participating are getting prevailing wages. I had the chance to sit down with a couple of absolutely just wildly impressive young people who were AmeriCorps members working in Portland and South Portland. And I had no idea. I had no idea what AmeriCorps volunteers get. And they really are volunteers. They're not getting paid prevailing wages. They were talking about how many people they have sharing their apartments in Portland. They were praising the farmers market ability to use SNAP dollars at the farmers market. They're doing everything they could to make sure that they could participate. They shouldn't have to be cutting corners in their lives to make this work. And so we really are looking at making sure that the Climate Corps is available, is a viable path for anybody who wants to be part of resilience and weatherization and climate action work.
So Kathleen, how
Yeah.
is that distributed throughout the state? I mean, do you have to go to a particular place to be in the Climate Corps? Or, I'm actually, thinking about this at a very technical level of like, do you go to a website and say, I'm interested? Do you?
I think that right now it is still to pilot project level for broad participation. But what I can do is let you know, because one of my colleagues has been very active in this. She sits on the board of Volunteer Maine, which has taken the charge on this, and she'll know all the answers. So I will connect you with Stacy. And I'm going to write that down. Oh, thank you, Kim.
I did see they're hiring. They have some job postings. I saw that a little while ago. So if anyone knows people looking for work, sounds like a great job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Jean, I see your question too about where those community resilience partnership communities are concentrated. And you're right, it is absolutely a high priority, and one that, as we think about getting ready for the next 4-year plan, making sure that we're distributing the benefits and burdens, as they say, broadly and equitably across the state is important. We're looking at ways to better integrate the work of the equity subcommittee, which, to be very honest with you, was a bit of an add-on in the first 4-year plan. There's always, in a lot of equitable program development circles, there's this debate. Do you break equity out and have it be seen as a different part of the work? Or do you weave it into all of the other sort of sector-specific work and risk it getting buried in, getting lost in the shuffle? There is not a right answer. There are multiple wrong answers, and we have tried to explore as many of them as we can so we can get them out of the way. and get to the good stuff. So I think for what we will see in the next 4-year plan is a much stronger emphasis within the buildings working group and the energy working group on equity, on making sure that we are engaging all Maine people, whatever their backgrounds, wherever they live, whatever their income levels are, in this work. I'm really excited about it. The members of the Climate Council will get reappointed sometime this spring, and then we'll start putting together the working groups. If you want to be part of that process, if you have ideas about people who should be part of that process, if you have questions about any of these things that we've talked about today, I do hope you'll reach out. I just feel like this work is absolutely the highlight of my career, getting to be involved in this Climate Council process and in putting together really actionable, ambitious plans to help Maine demonstrate what it looks like for a mostly rural, mostly purple state to lead on climate. There are a lot of ways that we can show the rest of the country and the rest of the world the path forward. And I'm just so grateful to have all of you on that path with me. So thank you. We have a couple more minutes. Andrea, great question. One of the things I did not talk about was Maine Conservation Alliance's role as the convener of the Environmental Priorities Coalition. The Environmental Priorities Coalition is a partnership of 37 organizations across the state that work on environmental justice, climate action, land conservation and land and water conservation, and healthy and sustainable communities. And one of the things that coalition does together every year is to identify the bills that we think lawmakers need to know about.
Yeah, good.
And the Pine Tree Amendment is one of our EPC priorities again this year, and absolutely agree that the youth climate activists have just been leading that charge. And there's a Maine Youth Action is a member of the EPC, yes, and is leading that charge.
I just want to add, so tomorrow, a very, very excellent session at 4 p.m. that they are leading on the Pine Tree Amendment with both Susan Inches as well as Maya Van Rossum, the originator of the whole green, green, it's called the Green State Amendment in other states, but here it's the Pine Tree Amendment. But so that's not to be missed tomorrow at 4.
Terrific. And Kim, you definitely get the prize for dropping all of the links in. Thank you very much. Yes. Nick, I see you have your hand up. Yeah. Do you have?
Yeah, I think I put in the chat, but it maybe disappeared in the chat. Our local representative down here, Dan Sayer, he has proposed a bill to tax bottled water extractors with the proceeds going to the Land for Maine's Future Fund. Has that gotten up to you yet? I mean, there's so many bills around.
There are, and that's another thing that, there are like 2,500 bills introduced this session. I know I've been in communication with Dan. I don't know if that's one of the bills. I have to go back through my email and see where that stands, but thank you. I would love to learn more about it.
I'll ask him to reach out.
Great.
Kim. Well, I think I've said this before, Kathleen, but I agree with you that my enthusiasm and the excitement of Maine being a leader is just, it's amazing. And I think that the amount is so overwhelming. Like every time I think it's going to get more simple for me, it's just another layer of like, oh, and this and this and that place to kind of sort out. What do I need technical expertise to be a valuable voice in? And where can I just be like, yes, make it better, whatever you say. It just, so I find it prevents me from necessarily, like I'm on every single mailing list for every organization, but I don't always feel that I'm that effective in doing something. And so just to kind of, again, say to all your groups and organizations, like, I feel like we need a warm line or something where we could call
love
and be
that.
like, I care about transportation. Who should I like join? Like, what's the right group for me? Or I have 2 hours on Tuesdays. Can you help me find my spot? Or, you know, I want to reduce my plastic use. Like, just some way that we could help each other find each other.
Yeah.
I find myself being even more excited that we already have a call on the calendar for later this week, because I have lots of things I want. I think that's great. And I absolutely hear you. And I do want to say just one thing about that, like feeling, do I have the technical knowledge that I need? To my mind, one of the most exciting things that has come out of this sort of increased focus on equity and on engaging different communities and different with different kinds of experiences is that we really are sort of leveling that field of, it is not just the energy experts, it is not just the lawyers, it is not like I love all those people. I'm grateful for those people and the work that they do. They are not the only ones who have a stake in solving these problems. They are also not the only ones who have ideas. And so when I say, if you think you might be a good fit for the Climate Council, I already think you're a good fit for the Climate Council. And it really is this, you know, and some of you know this, I had the good fortune to be Tim's oldest daughter's first grade teacher. I did not start my career as an environmental advocate. I found my way to this work because I care so much about it. And the fact that you're all here today tells me that you all care about it too. That is the only qualification. You are an expert on energy because you pay your energy bills and you see what happens. You see where your family uses energy and where you don't. You are an expert on buildings because you inhabit them. You are an expert in natural and working lands because you join Suzanne for kayak trips in the summer and go out into Maine's beautiful, beautiful natural wonder spots. We need all of those kinds of expertise if we're going to actually come up with solutions that meet all of our needs. So that's my plea. And yes, dating app for climate activism. That is our next topic. Suzanne will send out all the information about it.
So Kathleen, I have to tell you of a personal story. My son, who is 30 years old, was trained at the graduate level in transportation design, tried to join the climate group and was told he didn't have enough qualifications. When you look at the jobs, 99% of them require professional experience. There's very few mechanisms for people to get experience, which is why I'm harping on how do you actually do this? Yeah. And it just happens that he's a person who currently cannot drive because of a medical condition. And so this, he's really expert in transportation, and he really knows, it sucks to be in Maine if you can't drive because you can't get any place. Even if you call Uber and Lyft, you're waiting 45 minutes to an hour and a half to even get anybody to pretend like they're going to come and pick you up. And that's in Portland. That's not, in the remote places. So I just want to remind people that we are still excluding, talented, interested expertise because there's no training, there's no on-ramp for people who aren't already there. And as a mom, I find that really frustrating. And as young people try to become part of this movement, I'm sure they find it really frustrating too, because unless their parents are supporting them, they cannot do it.
Thank you. these are the kinds of stories that we need everybody to hear. And I just am jotting a little note to myself, shadow climate council. Like for all the folks, if not everybody is as an official role, what are what are the unofficial roles?
He does serve on our town energy committee, as a volunteer. So it's not like he's not able to do anything to help, but he, like many people, feels that having an income so that he can pay for his own food and housing would be a nice addition to his life.
I hear you, Mom, on that one. And I am just, we could go all day. I wish we could go all day. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for bringing this group together today. It has just been an absolutely joyful hour with all of you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Really excellent, so informative. We're very grateful. And thank you all for joining, taking time out of your afternoon. Hope to
And
see
Kathleen,
you soon.
thanks for all you do to
Thank you.
support everything good in Maine.
Yes, thank you.
We do it all. We're in it together. So thank you.
And thank you for the programming. I am not that familiar with the Wells Reserve, so it's a nice introduction.
Oh, thanks, Kimberly.
Go
Hope to
visit,
see you
Kimberly.
soon. Take care, everybody.